Hello, everyone. My name is Paul. Welcome back to the new news. I hope that everyone's having a fantastic day, and I hope that your family, and your friends are safe. And if not, I do hope that you find that safety and security in the very near future. There's been a ton of stuff that has happened over the last 48 hours, and a lot of stuff that has happened both in the country of Ukraine and elsewhere throughout the globe as we go through the global news today. And there is unfortunately, a lot of tragedy when it comes to what is happening in the world. A lot of really terrible circumstances that have put a lot of people, unfortunately, in a lot of very terrible predicaments. And things, everything ranging from war and conflict, terrorism, to things like natural disasters, famine, horrific, diseases that are going around. A lot of just human suffering in general. And the whole point of this channel is to bring some awareness to what is happening throughout the globe and bring some, hopefully, a little bit of good back into the world. And that's because we are here at the New News, are the news that gives back. And the whole point of this project is not just to raise awareness, but also to raise money for charity and to help people in a meaningful way that need it throughout the globe, directly affected by the same news stories we talk about. So if you check out that video description below, you're going to see a ton of different organizational links down there, all of which 70% or more of the donations that they actually do receive end up going directly to their programs, while 30% or less go to things such as salaries and administration's costs. Here at the New News, we're never doing any kind of super chats. We're never going to do any kind of merchandising or monetizing this channel for personal gain. 100% of everything we do is for charity. And if you don't want to help one of the donation links that are down there, we also have our own initiative linked down there as well that you guys can help us. We are actually, what we are providing is non-lethal aid, as well as medical supplies to both Ukrainian troops and Ukrainian medical personnel there in the country. We're partnering with other non-governmental organizations and nonprofits in order to help with the logistical efforts on that, a lot of which has been in the works for some time, and we have made significant headway in that. So we will be shipping here shortly some of our very first stuff, and we hope that you guys can help us be part of that and to help us grow our project, because in the end, we are working towards becoming a 501c3 nonprofit organization here at the New News, and that's what we want to do. And so with that, and I believe we'd be the first nonprofit 501c3 news organization in the world, if I am not mistaken. That's not a public broadcasting organization. So with that, we get ready to move here into the news. If you happen to be joining us live tonight, hello everyone who is joining us live tonight. Please feel free to ask questions. Jump down there into the live chat, ask questions. I'm always up for having some good discussions, and that is what we want to do here. We want to invoke some very good discussions and to help answer some questions that might be happening. A lot of it has to deal with warfare and stuff. And if you happen to be new here, I'll give you a little bit of my credentials when I'm trying to answer these different topics, some of these different questions. So I served in the Marine Corps between 2016 and 2020. I served as an 0352 anti-tank missileman and a corporal with 2nd Battalion, 7th Marines. During that time, I was deployed twice to the Middle East. My first time between October of 2017 through March of 2018. I spent about a month and a half in the country of Kuwait and 4.5 months in the country of Syria and the Deir ez-Zor and al-Hasaka provinces. There, I was attached to Special Operations Forces as part of Operation Inherent Resolve, and I assisted Special Operations Forces with fighting the Islamic State, as well as providing stabilization efforts in northeastern Syria. After that, I went back to the United States. I ran an armory for my unit for about a year and a half before rotating back as a Javelin team leader with the Crisis Response Company of Kuwait between October of 2019 and through March of 2020. During that time, I was mainly in Kuwait, but on New Year's of 2020, I was one of the 100 Marines that responded to the Baghdad Embassy complex once it was assaulted by protesters and Katiba's Hezbollah militants. Resecured the embassy and I ended up overseeing all anti-armor operations over the Baghdad Embassy complex before rotating down into Saudi Arabia to train Saudi Arabian Marines preparing to fight the Houthi rebels in Yemen. After I got out of the Marine Corps in August of 2020, I ended up becoming a logistical coordinator for a motor vehicle transportation company here in the United States. And so that's what I do now in my professional commercial life. So I'm a subject matter expert in anti-armor warfare and armored doctrine. I'm a fully cross-trained machine gunner, a fully cross-trained rifleman, and a partially cross-trained radio operator, as well as a CLS or Combat Lifesaver Certified Marine. And I do have real-world experience providing medical care to real battlefield casualties. Also a small unit leader, and I am very well versed in motor vehicle logistics and logistics in general, just from past experience from the military as well as in my commercial day job. So I do hope that you guys have some very good questions. I'll be happy to answer them. I have other interests in other things too: history, geopolitics, science, human geography, that kind of thing. I have always had an interest in, but I'm not an expert. And it doesn't matter if I'm an expert or not. I please implore that you, as a viewer, please do your own research. There is no substitute for doing your own research whatsoever. If you would like to have a starting place, our maps, including this one tonight, is always available on our website, and they are archived clear back through when we started the channel. So please feel free to go through there, click along with us, and follow along with the streams if you would like every single night, or you can go back through and help, and I hope that it helps with your research and trying to figure out what is happening there throughout the world. And so we now get to move directly here into the news, and quite a bit of news, yes, there is. And we start off here in the country of Ukraine, where we actually head over to the capital for our first couple of major updates in the night. First one is the fact that some of the fallen did return home. Quote, Ukraine has returned the bodies of 82 dead Ukrainian servicemen, coming from the Ministry of Reintegration of the Temporary Occupied Territories. This is an ongoing effort that Ukraine is continuing to work through. It's actually it's one of the very few things that Ukraine and Russia have any kind of coordination with, and a lot of that is brokered through other organizations such as the UN and the Red Cross, because as you can tell, Ukraine and Russia aren't necessarily on speaking terms, given the fact that they are currently fighting a war. But they do conduct prisoner exchanges, and they also conduct repatriation. Usually repatriation is more or less a one-way thing. It is usually the Russians transferring the bodies of Ukrainian fallen service members back to Ukraine. Russia has refused, for the most part, to accept the bodies of service members from their side, to the point that they're actually being stacked inside of a rail line, refrigerated rail units there in the we know of thousands of which are in the Kyiv Oblast alone. There are probably other sites as well. Unfortunately, we also get our child casualty and war crimes update, both of which came simultaneously from the General Prosecutor's Office here in Ukraine. Quote, Russian war crime statistics for the past week of April the 7th through the 14th, 2023. 1,614 new crimes registered, at least 468 children killed, 947 injured. And the data without full consideration of places of active hostilities, end quote. So we do get that from the graphic that came out today from the General Prosecutor's Office. So this is from their official Twitter, and we can see, once again, 80,477 crimes of aggression and war crimes, 17,038 crimes against national security, 468 children killed, and 947 have been injured thus far. Brings us immediately over here and into the Donbass, where we start our night off with the biggest topic. And that is another very horrific shelling has taken place in the city of Sloviansk. Sloviansk has been under sustained bombardment and has lightened up since they are no longer within standard artillery range after the Kharkiv counteroffensive, which saw a great deal of successes in the Liman area. However, longer range missiles can still reach Sloviansk, and Sloviansk was hit with several S-300 missiles. The number is still being kind of fleshed out as to how many exactly ended up impacting there. Sloviansk is located here just north of Kramatorsk, which is the de facto head of the Ukrainian government in that area. And using, according to preliminary data, S-300 missiles so far as of 3:18 p.m. Eastern Time or 10 p.m. local time, 8 people have so far been killed, including a 2-year-old child who died on their way to the hospital, and 21 people so far have been injured. In total, 54 high-rise apartments and private homes have been damaged or destroyed, as have several schools, shops, and businesses, a recreational center, as well as an administration's building. The rescue and recovery work is still ongoing, and they have very blatantly said that they will continue to provide updates, but they'll be coming at a later date. Rescue and recovery, so that number is likely going to be continuing to rise between between injuries and also, unfortunately, the dead. We get our first, of course, notice about this coming from Pavel Kolenko. This is a video of the recovery efforts ongoing there today.
Парковый 6, парковый 4 за красным кирпичом. Здесь 4 подъезда. Разрушены первые.
Go ahead and cut it off there. And we continue. We, of course, have a lot of photos coming out today. Pavel Kolenko. That is Pavel Kolenko, by the way. He's the head of the Donetsk Regional Military Administration. He went to the site today, obviously. And you can see, completely collapsed sections of some of these high-rise apartment buildings. Rescue workers still going in there. I mean, it is just... not everything is super clear right now because of the situation regarding it. That is tonight's main photo there of some of the recovery work ongoing there. Really kind of illustrates what what we see when it comes to the different types of bombardments against these cities. Slavyansk is a major city, but it doesn't necessarily at this point play a particularly major role in terms of the war. And it really emphasizes what's going on here. I mean, this is an elderly, the man has a cane. There's an elderly man injured by an indiscriminate bombardment that has now leveled his apartment building. And what is next for these guys is to find a 2-year-old child who is trapped underneath the rubble who does not survive. That is the epitome of a war crime. That is the epitome of what things like the 1949 Geneva Convention are meant to avoid. It is the epitome of what Article 1 or Additional Protocol 1 of the Geneva Conventions is meant to avoid, is these kinds of bombardments. They are specifically talked about, especially in Additional Protocol 1, to prevent these kinds of things from happening. You can see overhead views of some more of these apartment buildings. Me and Giuseppe are reposting these as well. She's the first Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs for Ukraine. Back and Alive, also known as Come Back Alive, a nonprofit organization operating since 2014. Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Ministry of Internal Affairs. Ministry of Defense. Ministry of Defense again. Keep in mind, a lot of these are our government agencies, so they're kind of reposting some of the same photos from each other. From Getty Images. That's the reality of what we're seeing daily from Ukraine. I mean, when we talk about indiscriminate bombardment, we're talking about, indiscriminate bombardment means that you're not focused on a military target individually. You're not targeting specific military structures. Even if there's military in the area, indiscriminate bombardment means that there is no differentiation between something that is considered to be civilian versus something considered to be military. This area is going to get bombarded. Not this military target will become, is to be bombarded, or, it is, this city is to be bombarded. This area of the city is to be bombarded, without any kind of discrimination between what is a civilian and what is a military target. These weapon systems and their employment methods of these weapon systems are not designed to be discriminate. The BM-21 Grad, for instance, or the BM-27 Aragon, are designed for engaging targets with massive volleys of unguided rockets. They're not designed for precision bombardment inside of a city. You see things like the Excalibur round or the HIMARS. These are guided, these are guided munitions. They are pinpointing their targets. And within those weapon systems, within the realm of those weapon systems, is possibility of gunner's error, a possibility of, error with the weapon system, and a possibility of, and these things are only accurate up to a certain degree, no matter how accurate your weapon system is when you're kind of talking about using these types of fires and these types of arms. The S-300 was not designed to engage a city. It was designed to engage aircraft. It is inaccurate as an air-to-ground system. Or it is inaccurate as a ballistic missile system, I should say, rather. It is an air-to-air system. They weren't designed to be accurate for hitting ground targets, and they aren't accurate in hitting ground targets. They're only accurate between 300 and 500 meters. The Caliber cruise missile, the Iskander-M ballistic missile system, these are older systems. They use older types of gyroscopic sights. And what it is, these things are impacting, other city, these things aren't very accurate. They're older systems, so they don't maintain that degree of accuracy that other countries have strive to, complete. We have reported here on the channel alone where a drone strike hit a room with a modified Hellfire missile that entered that room and destroyed that room individually, and killed the target. And that was it. That was it. That is precision. That is minimizing civilian casualties, regardless of why you're engaging a target, regardless of any of that, who the target is, why you're engaging them, what threat they pose. Regardless of that, the idea is to minimize civilian casualties. There is always room for error. There's always the possibility of something going wrong. And the Geneva Conventions and the articles and the additional protocols to the Geneva Conventions understand that war is destructive. That war is going to incur collateral damage and collateral loss of life. It is the epitome of the worst of humanity, and what the worst of humanity has to offer. So it's not that mistakes can't happen. It's not that, civilian casualties aren't going to happen in a perfect world. We don't live in a perfect world. And these articles, understanding the horrors of war, understanding what the world has had to go through, is meant to, prevent cities from looking like Ypres during the Battle of Passchendaele and the 4 different battles of Ypres in France during World War I. It's meant to prevent entire cities being wiped off the map. And in comparison to Ypres, we look at the city of Marinka, a city literally pounded into dust. There is nothing left of the city. Nothing left of the city. It is a hellscape. It is literally pounded into dust. I dare say it is more destroyed than Mariupol is. Sustained significantly more artillery bombardment. The battle for Mariupol ended at a point. Regardless of how devastating that battle was and how much the city was destroyed, Marinka, the battle isn't over. That fighting continues and that shelling continues daily, multiple times a day. So that is what these that is what the rules of war are meant for. That is why indiscriminate bombardment is not okay. It's because it's not about, the fact that mistakes can't happen using precision weapons. Is the fact that you're minimizing the likelihood. You're minimizing the chance to cause civilian casualties. Civilians in civilian infrastructure, their homes, their apartments, their places of worship, their medical facilities, their critical civilian infrastructure, such as water treatment plants, sewage facilities, and electricity, are all protected under the Geneva Conventions. These are all protected under a multitude of international conventions. The Geneva Conventions and the additional protocols to them, as well as the CCW, are the main ones that protect them, that people are going to reference because it's the easiest ones to remember. So that is why when we see things like this, why we're seeing, whenever you're hearing it in the report, keep in mind we don't report on every single time a city is bombarded, because it would be way too much. We focus on the main points here on the channel. It would be way too much. I would spend days just talking about a single day of Ukraine, and it would be, what every single day I'm reading it as we're going through here and researching. I'm reading about cities that have been bombarded, their homes have been damaged and destroyed, and that they need to evacuate and they need to get out of there. And if the elderly need help, that they need to call they need to call the Ministry of Internal Affairs or the government administration, because they will come and get them with armored vehicles and stuff to get them out. And that for some people it's too late, like those in Bakhmut. Every single day. With weapon systems specifically designed with the purpose in mind of flattening cities. They were designed to commit war crimes. Plain and simple. So, as a result of the attack on Sloviansk, the latest daily Donetsk update came from yesterday. And we get that from Pavel Kolenko, head of the Donetsk Regional Military Administration. He said, quote, on April the 12th, number of victims of the Russian army in Donetsk Oblast increased by 1 killed, 2 injured. This came out on Thursday morning at 8 a.m. local time. And we can see this came out both in Ukrainian and in English. And we can see here 1 person was killed and 1 injured in Okhotyn, as well as 1 person being injured in Kharkivka, which has continued to see sustained bombardment. Since the beginning of the invasion on February the 24th of 2022, 1,465 Ukrainian civilians have so far been killed, with an additional 3,382 having been injured. This does not include cities currently under occupation. So cities like the city of Volnovakha, or the city of Donetsk, or the city of Mariupol, where we know tens of thousands of people have died in Mariupol alone, just from the Maxar satellite footage and from the drone footage that people have taken from the sites. This is, this number is significantly lower than what the true number is. But this is just what the Ukrainian government has any way of verifying. Just absolutely horrendous. Just continue to see that number climb significantly. And that brings us down to Bakhmut. I'm sorry if you can hear that, by the way, in the background. That happens to be Javelin, who is probably rather upset. He really is very food motivated. He's a little upset that he's probably finished with his food and ready for more. So I apologize for that. But I will show you the newest co-host, Javelin, here soon. We finally got him to the vet. But we can see here, getting back to the news, that the AFU, the Armed Forces of Ukraine, are desperately fighting to prevent encirclement coming out of the city. Ukrainian forces are very desperately fighting Russian forces to prevent becoming encircled by a wave of enemy combatants circling around the city. At least 4 Ukrainian battalions, of which equivalents to about 20,000 troops, about 4 battalions worth of forces, and possibly much more, that's just the amount I've been able to identify, are currently operating in and around the vicinity of the city of Bakhmut. Russian forces are estimated right now on the low end at about 25,000, on the high end about 40,000 is strong. And so far, their encirclement has not been successful. It is a near encirclement like we've seen in the past in places such as... it is here is Javelin. Okay, so this is Javelin, everybody. Hi, bud. How you doing? So this is the newest addition to the New News family. This is Javelin. We found him as a stray. He is a very sweet boy. I know I have talked about him before here on the channel, so it's always worth showing. Hi, you want to say hi to everybody? He's very curious. We just took him to the vet, so he still has a lot to go through. He's got some issues that we're taking care of, but this is ow. Please take him. Thank you. And he definitely has the kitten claws. So I apologize, everybody, for the side detour, but it's always nice to finally show off the new co-host. Ow, he really dug into me on that one. We try and keep it lively here on the channel. By the way, hello, JD Redding. I did read the post. I just haven't had a good point to say it. It says, thanks for the stream. Watching on Roku, your stream is more chill than Mercado and the Enforcer. Thanks again for the news. Always happy. And don't forget to check out the stuff in the video description. I mean, the whole point of this channel is to help with these situations and to help with what's going on. But so as we go through here and continue with the news, I'm sorry for that. So talking about Russian forces, there's between 25 and 40,000 of them against about 20,000 Ukrainian troops right now from my estimates. And I'm actually keeping a map and trying to map out different units. But I'm not going to be showing that on the Discord for operational security sake. It's for personal usage. We've been able to identify about 4 battalions worth of units, about three battalions reinforced, 4 battalions minus. They're in the area. And right now, the Russians are actually kind of slowed in their advance. They are still advancing, and they were actually pushing here. They're kind of stalled out in the center of the city of Bakhmut. We're seeing very heavy fighting in and around the Bakhmut train station area, which is actually located over here. This is the Bakhmut train station. So if you're hearing about that, that's kind of where that's at. Meanwhile, we know that Russian forces have at least pushed through and over to over here. This is the arena for Bakhmut. That has been, is currently in the control of Russian forces. We've seen it's safe enough that, I say safe enough, Russian propagandists have actually moved into that area as well, and have actually videotaped there. Though we know that they tend to get a little bit closer to the front lines in some cases, they are kind of in the more rear areas. But a very difficult situation nonetheless. But because of the frustrations that they're having and how slow this advance is and how grueling of an advance it is with such stiff resistance, moving at a crawl, they actually ended up once again turning to incendiary munitions. Incendiary munitions against military personnel is actually against international humanitarian law, and as well as, of course, using it on a civilian area, whether it's civilian buildings or civilian infrastructure, or aka buildings, or civilian people. That means that is actually a war crime under the 1949 Geneva Conventions and Additional Protocol 3 of the 1949 Geneva Conventions, which was adopted later. And we actually can take a look at this. So from appearances, though, it has very minimal effect on the actual battle space. So this is drone footage. This is the battles happening near that train station I was just talking about. And so we can take a look here. Once again, this is not specifically the train station. It's just getting very close. This is in vicinity of it. And we can see the engagements happening there. Obviously, artillery shells landing. We're seeing very heavy artillery usage from both sides. It's just Ukraine appears to be using a quality over quantity strategy when it comes to their artillery engagement. The Russian forces are a quantity over quality. Ukrainian forces are the quality over quantity strategy. So their fires are going to be much more precision when it comes to their artillery bombardments than the Russians are, generally speaking, because they can't compete with the numbers, they're going to utilize those weapon systems as best as they can to engage and destroy as many units as possible with effectiveness rather than mass quantity alone. We continue here. Ukrainian forces moving throughout the city. This is closer to the front lines than what we've normally been seeing over the last few days coming out of Bakhmut. So those Ukrainian forces are either A, on a contact patrol, or B, conducting a movement to contact. This is a Russian tank engaging in very similar kind of look that we've seen from previous engagements. Battle of Mariupol really comes to mind here. This is a Russian tank engaging here on the streets. Now, if you refer to earlier videos and earlier streams, you may remember that we saw a lot of tank barriers, specifically Czech hedgehogs that were being held down with large cement blocks to prevent them from being easily moved. So what this is doing is this is the funneling method, and what the Ukrainian forces have done is they've established defensive positions and pillboxes and stuff throughout this city, and they've established themselves in different parts of different buildings to give themselves the best angles of fire. It allows for them to maneuver tanks and other heavy vehicles and equipment and troops very rapidly through their own defensive network, but it means that the Russians, in order to continue their attack, they can't drive their tanks through those Czech hedgehogs. It just won't work. They're blocked. They're unable to move. There are only certain areas where certain streets that the Russians are going to be able to move those forces easily, and that is funneling them directly into kill zones. Waiting. This tank has to maneuver into an area where it knows it will become engaged by an anti-armor team that is likely to knock out that tank and really disrupt that fighting capability of the Russians to continue moving troops forward. Because once that tank is blocking the path of everything else behind it, it makes it very difficult to continue, because you have to get a piece of recovery equipment, which is not widely available. You have to get them out there. You have to protect them, which they're still going to be under fire, and try to pull out this damaged or destroyed tank in the middle of a firefight and engagement, very much risking a very valuable, a very limited capability that a unit is going to have on hand, if it has it at all. So that's kind of what we're seeing here. We're seeing these tanks being funneled, but we are still seeing them being engaged in pretty close quarters urban combat. Something to note here is you do see a small amount. It looks like there's some infantry over here behind, but generally speaking, you're seeing armored vehicles operating in by themselves in a lot of cases in an urban area for the Russians specifically. Armored warfare and anti-armor doctrine, that is perfect for any anti-tank Muslim. Talking from experience, that is perfect for killing a tank. That is absolutely perfect. Tanks have a very narrow field of view. They do not, especially when all their hatches are closed, they don't have a lot of situational awareness. So they need infantry support in order to be able to make sure that they're not going to become engaged from the back or from the rear or what have you. These guys are going to have very minimal infantry support. You're seeing some minor support. These guys are hiding out behind this building. This guy's videotaping up here. Obviously not in a tactical, not in an operational mindset here. He's worried about getting the shot. Those guys worried about not getting shot. So you're going to likely see a lot of armor engagements at very close quarters, similar to what we've seen in Mariupol as well. And we're probably going to see a lot of Russian tanks knocked out of action because they're operating independently of a force without any kind of infantry support. And that's going to lead to some very devastating armored losses for the Russians. And the Wagner group especially, which is receiving very minimal support at this point because they are falling out of favor with the government. is going to be receiving less and less support and less resupply for armored vehicles, which is going to make them less and less combat effective against, say, heavily armed and armored Ukrainian forces who are already employing in a better way than the Russians are. Keep in mind, Ukrainians don't have to be the world's number one army. They don't have to be how the United States does things. In a war, there's first place and then there's the dead. They only have to be better than the Russians. Charlton Brooks says, I saw a video of an entire tower blocks being demolished. They're not sure by who, possibly deny sniper hides, etc. Probably not. It's just a possibility of that happening. Or they could be blasting buildings to creating roadblocks and debris that's going to make it difficult to maneuver. Generally speaking, comes a point where once a city is more, there comes a point where a city has become so destroyed it actually is more advantageous to the defender as a destroyed city than a clean one. The things that make or break someone, in a lot of cases, who lives in, who gets killed and who doesn't, is situational awareness, the ability to notice something is wrong when you can't tell, or when most people wouldn't be able to tell. That is, the difference between life and death in a combat situation. A lot of times, there comes a point where a city has become so destroyed that it makes it very difficult to tell that something is wrong, that something is not correct, that there's an issue. It doesn't stand out as much. If this city was pristine and looked like Bakhmut did before the war, you'd be able to tell there's some dudes in that house. That's a rifle. There's something weird about that house. There's something weird about that tree over there. In an urban environment that has been already damaged, destroyed, it becomes very cluttered and it makes it very difficult. Even when you're properly scanning, even in the best of conditions and the best training, you can fall into a position of it becomes very difficult to identify and properly be able to do your scans and to have that ability to tell that something is wrong, especially in such a kinetic environment, in such a fluid environment like this. Anyway, I continue here with the actual video. So that's actually a T90. Something very interesting to me about this, if I go over here, he actually zooms in here. So the reason I can tell it's a T90 is because of the wind sensor on top and because they try to make it look like it's a NATO vehicle when it most certainly isn't. But you're operating in an urban environment. Situation's already bad enough for any tank. However, they're in the middle of an engagement, and their defensive weapon, besides the coaxial machine gun, the PKT, that's going to be coaxial to the main gun, is this right here. This is the turret, the commander's weapon. This is technically an anti-aircraft gun. For tanks, they classify as an anti-aircraft weapon because that is a really big danger to tanks, even though it likely won't do anything. It's better to have something than nothing at all. This kind of operates like a crow system. It's kind of like a robotic thing you can operate from inside the vehicle. But despite that, the commander isn't operating it. It's actually covered up completely, which tells us that either they aren't thinking that they're going to need it, they're out of ammo. It could be out of action completely, as we've seen with many other things with the T90s that are supposed to be effective and supposed to be active, and they're not. The Arena Cast is a good example, which is these things down here, for those that don't know. This is actually the Arena Cast system. It's supposed to be able to destroy javelins and things like this. It's like the trophy system for our vehicles, for NATO vehicles. But their commander's gun's completely covered over. It's not, you can't use it. And so it's very interesting to see that in a combat environment, in an urban combat environment, they're not even attempting to operate that machine gun when it could be of significant advantage to that tank to do so.
Выстрел!
Booking 40 pointed out something good. If anyone's interested in a T90, there's one in Louisiana at a truck stop. Yes, there is. It was that is impressive to me. I never thought I would see that, but man, I have, just when you thought you've seen everything and you just continue to get surprised. And if I just continue to, what I need to do is I need to lower my expectations to zero. I need to start digging a pit to get my expectations low enough, because man, I never thought I was going to see that, but we did. We've seen a T90 in Louisiana. I don't know what else to say. Continuing here, this is actually from Russian media. This down here, this signature right here is RIA Novosti. They are a subsidiary of RT, which is a Russian government news run channel. So these are Russian forces. But this guy gets very, very lucky.
Счастливый человек под фонарь. Давай, ходи. Живой? Да, живой так сюда, блядь. Кроме этого, не, братан. Работает снайпер! Снайпер работает!
So they picked the one guy with an actual, and you can see it here. And boom. So it looks like he got very lucky. It looks like it actually ricocheted off the wall here and hit him in the helmet. But they picked the one guy with an actual ballistic helmet, because we've seen these guys actually being issued airsoft helmets. But this guy actually has a ballistic helmet. You can see the ballistic weave in there. And looks like he catches a ricochet to his helmet and blows off his goggles. So very lucky.
Вот так нахуй. Вот так нахуй. Пизда нахуй.
This has copyright music, but we can see just more Ukrainian forces operating, here in downtown. A lot of them conducting, contact patrols, going out and doing a lot of movement to contacts, going out to actually engage the Russian forces. You're talking about a lot of small unit leaders in this. So you're talking about team and squad level a lot of times, no bigger than platoons. They're acting very independently of each other to be able to, seize initiative where they can and engage Russian forces where they can and adjust their positions as needed. So it allows for them to be extremely flexible, but it can also become very complicated very easily.
Только что прошел бой. Да?
Ну, в том новом таком.
Ага. Ну, я с пулемета туда и стрелял. С пулемета туда и стрелял по этому дому.
We talked about incendiary weapons munitions. Well, this is the, once again, we've reported, I want to say, 13 or 14 times now of incendiary weapons munitions usage just on Bakhmut. Take a look.
Это Новый год раньше времени.
Пиздец. Снимаю покемонки, чтобы ты видел. Родимый. Осколки. Не осколки, вернее, это хуйня летит.
So, Little 40 asks, but why is the battalion but why? Where's the battalion supported attacks of tanks and artillery? Just biding time. Well, so you're seeing here about 4 battalions worth of Ukrainian troops located in and around Bakhmut. Like I said at the beginning, yes, it's an MTLB. I have no idea why they identify it as an FV-103 when it certainly is not. But what we've seen, that is definitely an MTLB. But why are we seeing independent, unit leadership tactics, here? Why are we seeing such small groups of Ukrainian forces acting independently? Why aren't we seeing the supported attacks with tanks and artillery and stuff? Because Ukraine, in an urban fight, has the upper hand. Ukraine being on the defensive is always going to have the upper hand. They're going to sustain less casualties and inflict more punishment against the Russians. You're not going to see large, tank battles and stuff happening around Bakhmut. One, because troop concentrations just aren't allowing for that, and the tanks are not being used in tank-on-tank warfare. Why bother in a tank-on-tank battle when you could just kill the tank with a much less expensive and a much more easily available anti-tank missile when instead of using your very expensive, very valuable multi-million-dollar tanks? That's just the way to go in the modern era. If this war was being fought in the 80s, yeah, sure, okay, go ahead with your tanks, tank-on-tank battle, which is what the T-Series is designed to do. But that's not the war we're fighting now. We're not going to see these large-scale maneuver elements. This isn't the war on terror. This isn't the invasion of Iraq. This is, or first Gulf War or second, take your pick. This isn't that war. This is a completely different setting. The Rasputitsa mud, the climate and the conditions, the Rasputitsa mud makes it almost impossible to maneuver forces in and around Bakhmut. And this battle has been happening for so long, all of the pavement is gone. It is just as much of a muddy slog in the streets of Bakhmut as it is anywhere else in the fields or the countryside surrounding it. It is absolutely brutal. So you're not going to be able to maneuver large columns of tanks and armored vehicles very easily. They're going to sink. They're going to bog down. That's going to make any kind of advantage that you would have otherwise a disadvantage. And it's better to use them in support. It's better to use them in well-positioned, engagement areas with solid lines, fields of fire, with solid, ability to engage, targets, in a quick and efficient manner, to put them into put the Russians inside of kill zones. And it's going to be much more advantageous for the Ukrainians to do that. The Russians, their doctrine, their top-down structure that is heavily emphasized on the officer corps is a detriment in this kind of environment. The fact it is more beneficial for Ukrainian forces to operate in small individual units than it is for the Russians to operate these large, sweeping maneuvers that they continually attempt to do. And you see this foiled time and time again. Time and time again. Look at what has happened in the past. You see Russian forces try to conduct this large sweeping maneuver after the success of the Battle of Severodonetsk, which arguably was one of the weaker defensive engagements for the Ukrainians in the war. And yes, that for the most part lost the Luhansk Oblast, but here in Severodonetsk, it was easily cut off. 3 major bridges between Severodonetsk and Lysychansk. It's a bad strategic area. It's a bad tactical position or strategic position, and withdrawal is honestly the best option at that point. The Russians tried to conduct these big sweeping maneuvers and prepared to end up, they took Liman, they took this area, they're preparing, had precursor bombardments of Slavyansk and Kramatorsk, and that's out of the Popasna pocket. They swept over and got stuck in the Battle of Bakhmut back in June of last year. And what you see is that they prepare to do this, and then what happens? They spread themselves out way too thin. They try to do too much at once, and they immediately lose and get their entire rank rolled there inside of the Kharkiv Oblast, and that is immediately followed by Kherson. Their top-down command structure has led to a horrific attrition rate just to get to the city. Think of how many thousands of bodies now litter the fields just outside of Bakhmut of Russian troops who, because of the top-down command structure, literally threw themselves in waves like it was the First World War into well-entrenched Ukrainian machine gun positions. The amount of videos that I have seen doing research for this channel of just bodies piled in front of a machine gun is insane. I could not count them if I wanted to. Not that I really wanted to see that over and over and over again, but it emphasizes the point of how high of a cost Bakhmut is. Bakhmut is the most definitive definition. It is the most, perfect definition of a Pyrrhic victory I have ever seen in my life. The cost of the Battle of Bakhmut, won for the Russians, lost for the Russians, doesn't matter. We're going to say that the Russians eventually take Bakhmut. I will say Russians will probably likely take Bakhmut. The situation has now, it's gotten to a point where it's becoming untenable. But it's a Pyrrhic victory. The massive losses inflicted on Bakhmut, despite it being a victory, has left Russia at a more disadvantageous position than it did before it engaged in the battle, before it dedicated. It is a Pyrrhic victory. Not a melancholic victory, but a Pyrrhic victory. It's that bad. It is that many losses. It took that much time, that many resources for one single battle of a city that no one has heard about prior to June 2022. And this begins to roll into the why. I've seen several things. Being said about this. And some people have said, it is a political thing. That probably has something to do with it. I mean, there's a lot of people saying yes, there's a lot of people saying no. The truth is, generally speaking, usually somewhere in the middle. There is probably a political edge to it. However, I don't think that is the main purpose, and I've seen it only one time that anyone has ever said anything about it, and I 100 wholeheartedly agree with that statement. And I saw it one time said by somebody else, and I think they're right. And I think that the reason why the Ukrainian forces continue to fight in Bakhmut is to bide time. But 100% they're biding time. Because every single day that the Russians are fighting in Bakhmut, for every single man that they are losing, every tank, every armored vehicle, every shell that they fire, every round of ammunition they use, every single piece of medical supplies, if they have any, that's not from 1935. Every single loss that is taken, every single day and hour and minute that they lose fighting the slogfest that is Bakhmut with a well over 100% attrition rate to their units, is another day that the Russians can't reconstitute and reconcentrate their forces to create a defensive perimeter to withstand the shock of a counteroffensive in the spring. Once that Rasputitsa picks up. I have, once again, begun to go through and prepare a map, a NATO indicator map, to tell me force sizes and locations and actually identify units and where they are in the battle space for my own personal usage. And what I have found is that you know there are a lot of units in the Donbass, but I have found more units in the rear that are currently preparing and in training and have been conducting field exercises and stuff. Some in Zaporizhia, some in the western parts of Ukraine, preparing for a counteroffensive, preparing for the big assault. The amount of troops and equipment and things that is being prepared in the western side of Ukraine and in the rear areas is something that, while I knew it was big until I started diving into it, I did not realize how big. I did not realize how big it was until I started recording it, until I started writing it down and looking into it more and actually pinpointing where these units are. It is massive. It is, and I haven't even gotten to dive into it as much as I want to. It is massive. It is an understatement of massive. The units that are just now receiving NATO equipment that aren't even fully developed yet they pale, in that number in the Donbass pales in comparison to those troop numbers, into their equipment, into the gear that they have. Look at what the guys in Bakhmut are using. They're units that have been fighting on the front line every single day of this war. The 93rd Air Assault Brigade is probably, the 93rd Separate Mechanized Brigade is probably the most well-renowned unit that we've seen, and we've actually followed for the most part throughout this war, especially in the Kharkiv area and into the Kharkiv counteroffensive, and now into the Donetsk area and the battle for Bakhmut, as well as the Battle of Severodonetsk and elsewhere. And a little bit in Zaporizhia. We've seen them fighting throughout the entirety of the war, somewhere here in the east, southeast. And we've seen, we know that they're in Bakhmut. They're one of the units that is very openly, we stated they're in Bakhmut there now. This is units that are veteran troops. They're veteran troops. They've been fighting the war. They don't have M16s. They don't have LCANs on their M16s. They aren't rocking 203s. They're not rocking, the M240. They're not rocking the SAW. They're not rocking a lot of Humvees or a lot of, this really fancy, the much higher class equipment. They've received some. But overall, they're not built around it. They're built around the equipment they started the war with and what they've captured since then that they know how to use. They're the old breed, if you were to say it like that. These guys are the veteran units that are still fighting with the Soviet-style equipment that they started the war with. Maybe a little bit more tricked out. Maybe there's some stuff supplemented in some areas. But for the most part, it's the same stuff that they've always used. They're not built like the units in the West. They're not built like what the units that are going to participate in these offensives are built like, and what kind of equipment they have. These are two different. This counteroffensive, and what I've seen and read and looked at so far of what they're getting and how they're equipped on the individual level and on the equipment level, is two very distinct type of Ukraine's army. Two very different phases of Ukraine's military. These guys are holding the line like they always have. These guys are going to carry on the fight here in the spring, and it is going to be, reporting on it is going to be insane. It is going to be absolutely nothing like the rest of this war. Just from what I'm seeing. Visually. Seeing the videos and seeing what we're looking at. Photos and training and everything else. It's not like the rest of the war. But their NCO Corps is built up of veterans that have been fighting in other units. And they've taken them and they've trained them, on these different styles. So they have experienced non-commissioned officers to conduct small unit leadership tactics. They have NATO-led training with NATO equipment. And they're fresh units with brand new fancy Bradleys and Strykers and MRAPs and Humvees and tow systems and 50 cals and Mark 19s and everything that you would expect an infantry battalion to have, or a mechanized infantry battalion to have, to really put a lot of hate and discontent downrange. And their armored units, their armored companies, their tank companies are going to have Leopards and Abrams and tanks that are far superior in capability to any of the T-Series models. With the exception maybe being the T-90, and that's a maybe these days. You cannot compare the two. They are too different. So that is why they're buying their time in Bakhmut to let these guys get ready. So that way, when the time comes, they're ready to go, and they're going to put some serious hate and discontent downrange on a scale I don't think we've seen yet. And that's, after the Kharkiv counteroffensive, that's a pretty high expectation to live up to. So I won't say it's easy. I think we're going to see a lot of losses because it will be an offensive, but I will say that I think it's, I think you probably less Kharkiv counteroffensive, more of, going through here and into the Kherson area. I think we're probably going to see it more like Kherson. Facts Matter says, wants to know how I know the SMO, or that's the Special Military Operation, is going as Russia wants it. Sure, I'm interested to know. I'm curious as to what you have to say. Because so far, your war isn't going the way you want it if you have T-54s and T-54-55s that are currently sitting in Zaporizhia Oblast, which I saw recently geolocated. Generally speaking, that is not considered a recipe for success. Because when the first T-54-55 prototype rolled off the assembly line, Hitler was still alive. So, I'm curious as to how you know this is going well. Or not necessarily well, but how they want it. Because that's an interesting tidbit. I'm waiting on a response. So I apologize. There is a delay with the stream. So I'm sorry that I'm kind of biding time here. Because I'm curious as to what Facts has to say. Book of Forty says Russia lost 95% of their Spetsnaz troops, so they're losing their best too. Well, I think that their best got killed pretty early on in the war for the most part. There probably be some small amounts left. I know that there are elements of the VDV left, but for the most part, the VDV as a unit, as like a military force, has been annihilated. What they do have left was actually used in a counteroffensive, or an attempted counteroffensive by the Russians up in Kremenna. Which was a very tense situation, as at the time the head of the Luhansk Regional Military Administration at the time was Sergei Haida. He did say it was a very tense and difficult situation. There's not a lot of information coming out of the Luhansk front along Kremenna because it is in a stalemate. Pretty much everyone is focused intently on Bakhmut. Russia has not blown the bridges over the Dnipro or the rail transfer station on the Polish border. If Russia was losing, they would blow those up to slow resupply to the front. You know, that is a very interesting thing to bring up. Except that it's not entirely true. because Ukrainians, to prevent or interrupt the escape of Russian forces, significantly damaged the Antonovsky Bridge across the Dnipro River, and also destroyed pretty much the barge bridge that was going next to it to prevent or interrupt escape. As well as over here, this rail bridge has been destroyed as well. And also, if we go over here to Novokakhovka, the Novokakhovka Dam, this section of the bridge right here is completely collapsed in, and the rest of the dam is actually damaged. You continue further on here, and we actually have to go all the way up into the city of Zaporizhia before we see more bridges getting damaged to the Dnipro River. And we have actually seen where floodgates and things have been hit with missiles here at Zaporizhia. We've seen Zaporizhia targeted multiple times. The hydroelectric dam has been damaged as well during their attacks with critical civilian infrastructure. We continue up here to the city of Dnipro. We know the South Bridge has been damaged. We know that many of the bridges across the Dnipro have been significantly damaged in one way or another, or have been targeted, especially the hydroelectric power plants, because it was a 2-for-1 blow on using a Russian missile, which they're having a depleted stockpile of, as we can see with the usage in Slavyansk of the S-300 missile, which isn't meant to be a ballistic missile. But they have eye-watering they had an eye-watering stockpile of them. Secondly, the threat of blowing up the rail transfer stations on the Polish borders. Once again, Russian missiles are not accurate. I say accurate with some relative term. Every weapon system is accurate depending on how you want to build it. But the Russian ballistic missile systems and their ballistic missiles and cruise missiles and stuff are only accurate. The more capable ones are accurate to about 200 meters ish, 100 to 200 meters of accuracy, while their S-300s are only accurate between 3 and about 500 meters. So they'll land it in the general area, but you're not going to get too close. In a battlefield, 100 meters is a big distance. 100 meters is a big difference, especially at a border area. Russia attempting to strike at, say, I don't know, the crossing here. We'll just pick a crossing along the borders here. The closest one to Lviv looks like this one. This border crossing, obviously a big deal. But you see where the rail transfer station is? Right? You see, like, I don't know, where all these roads and everything are. You can see the rail lines kind of coming into here and hitting this rail transfer station. Let's look at how big this is. 700 feet. You have roughly 700 feet-ish of distance between it being Poland and a rail transfer station inside of Ukraine. So when your weapon systems that you're going to utilize are accurate to within about 100 to 200 meters, that's a really big toss-up of it slamming it into, a Polish town. So that would immediately trigger an Article 5 by NATO, which would annihilate whatever is left of the Russian military. Russian missiles have wiped out the UKSF headquarters in Odessa. That's already been disproven. That was actually a attack. The photo that they actually used for that, by the way, was an attack from Syria. So you know. So that was disproven pretty quickly. And Russian missiles wiped out an SBU headquarters in the middle of a city. I would like to know the reference you're having to that. They did attack the one over here, Venezia, which it was the headquarters. It was an attempt on the attack, and it was an attempt to attack the Air Force Command of the Ukrainian Armed Forces. Russian missiles are GPS guided. They are not GPS guided. GPS is an American system, so they're not GPS guided. They have their own. and they are as accurate as our missiles, if not more so. That is also completely false. Their weapon systems do not have the advanced gyroscopic sights or the gyroscopic seekers inside of them that make them as accurate as NATO weapon systems. To give you an idea, the Russian weapon system, their most accurate weapon system is probably going to be the, I'd say, Caliber. I think is probably the newer one that they're going to have when it comes to cruise missiles, and it is more along the lines of the 100-meter rule of accuracy. The HIMARS missile will put a telephone-sized missile between me and the camera I'm talking to you on. GPS is open source. That is false. It uses American satellites. They have their own version of it. So that's how the Russians have any kind of guidance. They have their own version of GPS. In fact, I'm pretty sure I could just look it up here on Google. Russian version of GPS. Russian version of GPS is GLONASS. Which, if you actually go and get, what is it called? I'm trying to think of the Garmin GPSs. The Garmin systems that you can get, that if you can go hiking and stuff with, you can actually open it to both GLONASS. It has both GLONASS and it also has GPS capability, and because they're built, most of them built prior to the war, so there's not inherently issues with them having been used like that. So it's not open source. GPS is not open source. It is limited to whoever has access to actually develop on those, because it uses U.S. satellites. So that is a very important strategic thing for America, which is why the Russians had to build their own GLONASS, which, being a near-peer adversary, they have to use. And so does, primarily, also China is one of the largest users of GLONASS as well. Now, moving on and into the international news, we move over here and into Russia, which we don't have anything to do with the war coming out of Russia today. Instead, I have a very, very dumbfounding news story that came out of Nizhny Tagil. Facts matters. If you want to live in a fantasy world, that's on you. Pretending your enemies are weak when they are strong is why Biden is losing this war to Putin. I was at Kasham. So, yeah. I'm not particularly scared of the Russians. Woman was detained for hiding drugs in a fake baby here in Nizhny Tagil. In Nizhny Tagil, a woman was detained for hiding drugs in a fake baby, and in order for the child to move and make sounds, she put a cat in the clothes. While walking, the mother with her purring child were noticed by policemen. The woman was detained and they decided to examine her. Instead of a child, a cat was found, and it was under several bundles of drugs. A total of 170 grams of prohibited substances in total. And there's a video. Yep, drugs. Yep, more drugs. Ah, look at that. Look at the kitty. More drugs. The cat's just chilling there. A for effort, I guess, but I'm not quite sure. But my favorite is the end to this. The cat looks like it knew. Like, it looked like it knew what was going on. Like, yeah, I'm an accomplice. Damn. I got caught. Joe over here into Paris as we continue with Europe. France's Constitutional Council approves higher pension age. France's Constitutional Council on Friday approved a very unpopular plan to raise the retirement age from 62 to 64 in a victory for President Emmanuel Macron after 3 months of mass protests over the legislation that has damaged his leadership. The move threatened to enrage unions and other critics of the pension plan, including protesters gathered in spots around France on Friday evening as the decision came down. Macron's political opponents vowed to maintain pressure on the government to withdraw the bill. People have taken to the streets of Paris after France's Constitutional Council upheld the pension reform.
Oh, sa mère. Oh, la chatte à Macron, là. Dehors.
So protests do continue there in France. Did you see the video report of Smart 55 ammo being used against 2 tanks at once, kilometers behind Russian Federation lines? I haven't, but it wouldn't surprise me. We've seen all sorts of types of ammunition being used inside of Ukraine, so it wouldn't surprise me. But I am also kind of curious. I don't know a lot about Smart 55. Keep in mind, I was an anti-tank missileman, right? So I don't know everything there is to know about every aspect of warfare. I just have, like, my subject matter expertise, which is infantry stuff. You know, things I need to know. So that's, you know, that's kind of, I can't be an expert on everything. So I have to at least let you know where I stand on things. I don't know everything. So I don't know what a Smart 55 ammo being used. I haven't heard about it being used. I don't know what it is, but if you support Ukraine so much, why are you not there? U.S. government is actively recruiting mercs. Phone numbers all. Facts matter. Serious question. If you support Ukraine so much, why are you not there? U.S. government is actively recruiting mercs. Phone numbers all over the place in major cities. You know, I've actually stayed. You know, last year I was actually staying across from the Ukrainian embassy, and I still haven't seen any major numbers anywhere. So, I'm kind of interested about that. But there's a really good answer to that, and a very personal one, because that is probably a question I'm sure I was not the first person that asked that about me. So very obviously this channel has a bias when it comes to Ukraine. You can't look at what's happening in Ukraine and not have a bias for it. But for me personally, my first deployment was rough. My first deployment, my Syria deployment, I spent 4.5 months in Deir ez-Zor and Al-Hasaka provinces of Syria. It was very rough. Not just as just because, I was in Syria and, I had never experienced anything like that, done training and stuff and hardship, but, there are a lot of reasons. The hardest thing was the casualties, the civilian casualties. The Russians were coming in and they were engaging. They were leveling cities. We'd go out on a resupply mission, or we go out and do a patrol, reconnaissance, or what have you, and you'd be passing by towns and they're just leveled. I mean, you can't describe it unless you've seen it. Just leveled, just gone. And, there'd be, aircraft, flying above it, Russian aircraft flying above us and stuff. And the amount of civilian casualties we've treated was unreasonable. Just unbelievable in the amount and scope. They used to bring them in on bongo trucks. Really, just 20, 30 at a time stacked in the back of a flatbed truck. And they bring them to us because we were able to, provide medical aid. I'm talking women, children, men. Occasionally there was some FCF guys in there. But usually it was just a lot of civilians. The Assad regime and the Russians who were using cluster munitions were just dropping in on refugee camps and dropping in on the cities and, Deir ez-Zor and, the Middle Euphrates River Valley, Raqqa, Aleppo and stuff was still going on, but we were a little too far east to see that. But we obviously knew. And treated a lot of them. Unfortunately, after we stabilized them, they had about a 50% survival rate going into care elsewhere. And then on February the 7th, 2018, my sister platoon, CAT 2, Combined Anti-Armor Team 2, was down in the Conoco gas fields, which is down there along Deir ez-Zor. And, they were there with Special Operations Forces, Green Berets, ODA, and they were engaged by the Wagner Group and a bunch of pro-Assad militants. And we responded out of, I was part of the KRF force that responded out of Shadadi, going southbound to assist with them. The artillery fire was too bad. It was too bad for us to get too close, but we were able to provide assistance with security with HIMARS and HIMARS radars, and also calling in the airstrikes to get them annihilated off the face of the earth. And so they attacked my friends. But the key thing is that when I got out of the Marine Corps in 2020, I had been through Syria, 4.5 months of fighting the Islamic State and seeing the horrific things that had to deal with that, treating civilian innumerable amount of civilian casualties, a lot of them caused by the Islamic State, a lot of them caused by the Russians and the Assad regime, and seeing things that I'll never forget. I'll never forget them. I have a hard time sleeping at night. I have a very hard time every day. I think about it every day. And, then I went to the embassy and everything else, and which wasn't as bad. But by the time I had gotten through my Marine Corps career, and by the time I was a disgruntled corporal, I was done with the whole war thing. I was done. I had seen and done enough of it. And I wasn't interested in it anymore. So after doing some things that I really am not proud about all the time, I wouldn't trade it for anything, because I feel like I made a difference in my career, and I did the right thing every time with what I did. I have no regrets over doing what I did. Don't get that twisted. But it's not necessarily always stuff that I'm always proud about. It's not always my finest moment, even if it was the right thing. I still think it's terrible. I don't think there's no good way to spin the war. There's no jokes, there's no funny things you can make about the war, or you should be making about the war, no matter whose side you're on. But there is a right and a wrong thing. There is a moral compass that goes along with it. By textbook definition from the United Nations, it is a genocide. By the Geneva Conventions. By the 1993 Rome Statute. And so it's just, you know, you have to have a understanding that, you know, it's a genocide. Even if the United States has done some bad things in the past, even if everything else, you could talk about whatever talking point you want. There is no justification for genocide. There is no justification for human rights violations. There is no justification for torturing people. There is no justification for any of it. Now, I hate the Russian troops and I hate the Russian government through and through. I don't hate the Russian people, but I hate the Russian government and the Russian troops and the Wagner Group more than anybody. I will always hate the Wagner Group and Yevgeny Prigozhin for what they've done. They've earned that. The average person hasn't, but they do. But there's no amount of what about this and what about that, or we've done this or that, or they have done this and that. There is no justification for human rights violations and genocide and, you know, ethnic cleansing and stealing children and bombing hospitals and annihilating it, you know, making mass graves out of people and besieging people and starving them to death and executing massive amounts of people in the street and then lying about it in every step of the turn. So that is why. I am not in Ukraine because I do not want any more war for myself. I am done. I cannot mentally or physically endure it anymore. I have had my fill of doing that. So now I focus on humanitarian efforts. I focus on supporting the people who are still willing to do that, who are still willing to continue that. I support charities and non-governmental agencies and are trying to start our own initiative to do good things for not just Ukraine, but everywhere else in the world too, because Ukraine's not the only issue. So that's why. I do care about Ukraine a lot. I have learned a lot. And I have a lot more to learn. I care about what's happening a lot. I have personal investments in some. Personal, emotional investments in some of this stuff. I have made ties and networked and made friends and all sorts of things. And I have, you know, a lot of similarities to what, you know, some of the experiences are, though not in nearly the same degree. So I have an emotional investment in what is happening there. And have no problem supporting them. That's why. The world's not perfect. The world sucks. There's corruption in every government in the world. Some are just better at hiding it than others. There are bad things that every nation on the planet has done. France was a colonial power, so is the United Kingdom. The United States have done some terrible things too. Just look at the Native Americans. So did Canada. And they're known for saying sorry. But you can still have a moral compass. So that's why. And with that, I hope that I hope that answers questions, because I know that you're not the only one. But I also don't want disinformation in any of this. So there are good talking points if you want to have good conversations, good faith discussions. I have no problem, but I also won't allow for very blatant, disproven things happen, in my channel. So keep that in mind, as I do have moderators online. And speaking of aid here, we have $2.2 billion in financial aid going to Ukraine as we continue on with the news. The Ukrainian Prime Minister reported on April 14th that France is ready to provide Ukraine with $2.2 billion in financial aid as part of a long-term program. It is reported that the funds will be used for reconstruction efforts. If you would like some more, the Kyiv Independent does have more on that for you guys. And they have an article here. Speaking of Syria and the Islamic State, though, we do have yet another operation which was successful. The U.S. Central Command did announce the detention of a field commander of the Islamic State and 2 of his subordinates in Syria. The operation took place on the evening of April 8th on the eastern part of the country. The detainee is a native of Yemen, Hudhaifa al-Yamani, and the ITO. He was responsible for organizing terrorist attacks throughout the region. And we do have that official announcement from the United States Central Command. Jumping down here into Riyadh in Saudi Arabia. So the Saudi Arabian Authority seized more than 3.6 million Captagon pills. Major Mohammed Al-Nujabi, spokesman for the General Director of the Narcotics Control, said that the security and monitoring of drug smuggling and the promotion networks has resulted in the seizure of 3.636 million Captagon pills concealed in a potato shipment. The drugs haul at an estimate street value of 36 million to 90 million, according to research published by the International Addiction Review Journal. Captagon is a popular drug there in the Middle East. Down here on the border with Saudi Arabia and Yemen, Houthis and Yemeni governments have begun prisoner exchanges. The multi-day operation to exchange nearly 900 prisoners from Yemen's war held by the Houthi militia and the Yemeni government began on Friday. First plane carrying 35 people landed in the city of Aden, which is controlled by the pro-Saudi supporters of President Hadi. Another plane with 125 Houthis landed in the city of Sana'a, held by Shiite militants. The Red Cross will be working with the Yemeni and Saudi Red Crescent to provide first aid services. Coming from the ICRC of Yemen, as well as Jessica Moussan. And Myanmar, also known as Burma, the death toll has risen to 133 following the airstrikes by the Myanmar junta. The death toll did increase. Today, the military spokesperson confirmed that the action was targeting the National Unity Government, or NUG, referred to as terrorists, and the civilians were killed as they were forced to help the NUG. So they did, in fact, confirm that, yes, we committed a massive war crime. Coming from Bardir, here in Somalia, as we move here into the African continent. Casualties from damages following heavy rains. Fresh floods following heavy rainfall have displaced 140,000 civilians. At least 21 were reported dead following flash floods in Bardir district on March 21st through the 24th. For health and nutritional centers, 6 primary schools and a secondary school were also damaged. While moving over here into Ghana, the first approval for the first ever malaria vaccine has occurred. Ghana became the first country to approve the first ever malaria vaccine, R21 shot, which has been shown in a phase 2 trial data to be 77% effective in preventing the disease in the absence of major safety concerns. As been reported that Ghana's regulators have seen unpublished phase 3 trial data that were showing similar results. Shot has been approved for children 5 to 36 months old, and India's Serum Institute will produce up to 200 million doses of this vaccine annually in Accra at a couple of dollars per shot. Malaria kills 600,000 people every year, mostly being children. R12 has been designed as of 2012. Josh and book on the tablets. Yeah, they're kind of an amphetamine. They're not quite like meth, but they are an amphetamine. I don't quite understand what Captagon is. It's a interesting kind of thing. It's weird. Yes, Captagon was. Thank you, Riley, who is one of our moderators. Captagon was first manufactured in 1961 as an alternative to amphetamine and methamphetamine, used at the time to treat narcolepsy, fatigue, and behavioral disorder, minimum brain dysfunction. Up here in nearest facts, here in Tunisia, 32 migrants ended up dying in a shipwreck. Ship carrying migrants from sub-Saharan Africa sank off the coast of Sfax, headed to Europe. Tunisian Coast Guards found the 10 bodies on Wednesday, 14 more on Thursday, and 8 more recovered on Friday. Tunisian Coast Guard intercepted 14,000 migrants who were trying to reach Europe from January through March. If you'd like some more on that, the New Arab has more information for you. And to wrap up our night, finally here, we move here and into the United States, where we have a couple of different, more uplifting topics to end the night on. A solar flare was created in the lab for the very first time. Solar flares are an enormous plume of superheated plasma that are ejected from the sun. And these massive plumes are so large they could engulf our entire planet several times over. But for the first time, researchers have created mini solar flares in the laboratory that are small enough to fit inside of a lunchbox. In a new study published on April the 6th in the journal Nature Astronomy, a team of researchers from California Institute of Technology, or Caltech, in Pasadena created their own artificial corona loops in the lab to try and solve how solar flares transition from corona loops into full-blown projectiles. Dream discharged electricity from a pair of electrodes inside of a magnetized gas-filled chamber. The electricity ionized the gas, creating a string of plasma between the two electrodes, which was then briefly held in place by a loop by the chamber's magnetic field before collapsing and firing a mini flare outward. There you guys go. That is so cool. So there you go. That is them creating a miniature solar flare. This will allow us to understand how the sun produces these and allow us to be able to more accurately observe when a solar flare is going to occur. Looking forward to jumping is trying to get into the classified documents incident. I actually don't have anything on that tonight, but I can talk about it a little bit because I want to clear some stuff up. Hubble unexpectedly finds a double quasar in distant universe. After 33 years, the Hubble Space Telescope is still uncovering new cosmic surprises. The venerable instrument recently added to its extensive catalog of finds when it spotted a rare double quasar blazing away in the distant reaches of the universe. Despite their recent discovery, the double quasars are likely no longer exist. In the intervening eons, from the light leaving the quasars to the moment it was picked up by Hubble, it has likely collided and merged with one another into a single black hole, even more massive than the two that went into it. Likely, the galaxies orbiting them have probably become one gigantic elliptical galaxy, and scientists believe that studying mergers like this could help us piece together deeper understanding of how our galaxies, like our own, came to be. And there you go. That is a merger between two quasars. But that is everything when it comes to the news points tonight. Now, I do know that Bookham 40 did say something in regards to the classified documents leak. I knew about the classified documents leak pretty much at the same time everyone else did. And I have been very, very touchy on this subject because of, once again, a thoughtful look at things like operational security. Quasar, not Quasar. Quasar. I'm sorry for not properly pronouncing these things. I have been very reluctant to talk about the security breach, the national security breach, when it comes to the classified documents or possible classified documents being leaked. I say possible because the Pentagon has neither confirmed nor denied that they are actually real. Obviously, it's real enough for the Department of Justice to act on it. There has been an arrest made. There have been charges that have been levied against a 21-year-old National Air Guard member from Massachusetts. He is currently in custody. This was a DOJ, or Department of Justice decision, and not one from the Pentagon. The Pentagon doesn't necessarily always make those decisions. They turn those incidents over to the Department of Justice to carry out, and once they are done, he will probably if he is found guilty, he will likely be court-martialed. Or even if he's not found guilty, he can still be court-martialed and found guilty under military law, under the Uniform Code of Military Justice, or the UCMJ. Pretty good evidence against him. Apparently, this came out on his Discord channel. That wasn't intelligent. And a lot of other things. A lot of people have said, all sorts of things about this. Why does a 21-year-old kid have access to these kinds of things? His job was an intelligence analyst at the Pentagon. It doesn't matter his age. What matters is his capabilities and what his position, his job in the military is. He is an intelligence analyst. Intelligence and analyzing said intelligence generally means you're going to be touching sensitive information regardless of what age or rank you are. Different things have come out. When it comes to the documents themselves, I refuse to show any of the documents for a number of reasons, even though I easily could have. One is the fact that I don't want to show something that isn't necessarily true. Two, ethics. I have, for my job in the military, I required to have a clearance. I can maintain that in my civilian life, and professionally, I don't think it is wise for me to disclose things like that for my own professional life, and I think that's a thing I need to think about whenever I'm doing these kinds of this kind of work on the side, especially. And third, and probably most importantly, is the fact that this is these could put people in danger, and operational security. Once again, same reason I maintain a map of certain things that I don't necessarily use here on the channel, but it's for personal reference and for personal intuition and being able to make predictions and things and evaluate. It's important that it's important for me to I think it's important to not assist in that information getting out. I see that JD Writing says, thanks for the stream. Oh, thanks for joining us. I'm sorry that you're heading out early, but I appreciate the help, everybody, and I appreciate the help there, JD. Hope to see you around. Thank you for jumping in here. But yes, he says, pointed out that nothing in the link was not already out in the public domain if one is paying attention. Yes and no. There were certain things that were definitely, I don't think, that were in the public domain as I have been reading and looking through it. I think there's some considerations to think about with that, but also I don't need to assist it in becoming common knowledge, even if it was. So once again, in respect to people's safety and security concerns and many other things, I'm not going to assist a problem. And I also am not going to, they were also altered in some cases that I saw, including the very first one I saw was an altered one. So, cognizant of trying to get the facts and getting everything straight, I have been very reluctant to talk about it. I have been very reluctant to acknowledge it or to I have yet to make a point on it. And there's been a reason for that. So I have some things we're trying to think about. We're trying to do this in as morally right as we can whenever we're making these, and we want to also not put anyone in danger excessively to what needs to be, so, or to what they're already in. So loose lift sink shift Straughton, yes, that's correct. So in effort to do this right, but also not put people in danger, and also to try and do this in a professional manner, and to not impact anyone in a severe manner, whether it be myself or anyone else on the team, because other people will have other positions that are important on the team. I think it's we're trying to be careful with that. So with that is everything in the news. That's all I'm going to say on it at this point, and I will get back to it when I feel the time is right. But thank you everyone for joining us. I see, obviously we're at the end of the stream now tonight. I hope that you guys found this knowledgeable. I hope that you guys found this as a kind of a call to action in some cases. And I hope that you guys continue to support the wonderful organizations in the description, because there are a lot of people that are suffering throughout the world. Whether you're talking about Syria, you're talking about Ukraine, whether you're talking about Somalia or Southeast Asia or Africa or wherever, there's always somebody who needs significant help. So I hope that you have learned something. I hope that you guys can understand what's happening in the world around you, and that that you guys will help put a little bit of good back into it. So thank you very much for joining us, and I hope that you check out the video description below. There are a ton of different organizations down there trying to do a lot of good things in a lot of different areas. If you want to support Ukrainian troops or humanitarian efforts in Ukraine, there's plenty down there for you if that's what you're mainly here for, as well as stuff that covers the rest of the globe. They're also on our website, and we also of course have our own organization or our own initiative that we're starting here as well. Thank you very much for supporting the channel. If you can't give a lot to these organizations, give a little. If you can't give anything at all, that's okay too. Help us raise awareness for these situations by spreading the word about the channel. In the meantime, I hope to see you guys back here on Monday for another 72 hours of news and review at 10 p.m. Eastern Time at 9 p.m. Central. Have a great weekend, everybody. Please stay safe. I hope that you and your family and your friends remain safe. And if not, I do hope that you do find that safety and security in the very near future. Thanks for joining us, guys. My name is Paul at the New News, and have a fantastic rest of your evening and the rest of your weekend. Bye now.
Going home, Russian soldiers, going home. Бо ми всіх вас тут змішаємо з багном. Історія до повноваги і чудно кличе діти нахуй. Тут працює ЗСУ і ТРО. Нам не треба ні конфлікту, ні війни. Та ми готові всіх вас звать до сатани. Тисячі вже полягло, і все більше шлейфуємо. То для них нема нічого, крім труни. Going home, Russian soldiers, going home. Бо ми всіх вас тут змішаємо з багном. Історія до повноваги і чудно кличе діти нахуй. Тут працює ЗСУ і ТРО. Вызволять пришел, братишка, ну привет. На моей земле тебе один ответ. Нашим людям с кирпичом, даже танки и бачок. Вам не взять нас и за 100 000 лет. Going home, Russian soldiers. хвосту змішаємо з багном. І стрія до волноваги чутно клич, ідіть нахуй, тут працює ЗСУ. Going home, Russian soldiers going home. Бо ми всі хвосту змішаємо з багном. І стрія до волноваги чутно клич, ідіть нахуй, тут працює ЗСУ. Going home, Russian soldiers going home. Бо ми всі хвосту змішаємо з багном. І стрія до волноваги чутно клич, ідіть нахуй, тут працює ЗСУ. Ідіть нахуй.